Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So glad that you're joining us here at Centering Justice. My name is Hamida Bhagarathi, pronoun she, her, hers. I have the joy of offering leadership to learning communities. Emily, yes, more Zooms with musical intros. I'm really lucky to have with me Yudit, Mesvin Johnson, President and CEO of New, and Carly Frederick, our program manager, leader, magician of learning communities, just Jill of all trades with her, with us as well today. So really glad to have folks together. We'll spend some more time connecting with our speaker collaborators in a little bit, Tepfirah and Lindsay from Keep Growing Detroit, but super excited to have them with us here today. Welcome to my apartment once again. I join you today from Ypsilanti on the unceded and still occupied lands of the three council fires of Michigan, Sauk and Fox and Wyandotte, and land in which contemporary Indigenous peoples continue to live and thrive and contribute to their own and our collective uplift. Um, as we think about shared leadership, just want to name the ancestral connection to the ways in which throughout the generations, years, our ancestral siblings have thought about ways in which leadership and growth can be shared across communities in ways that were not always rooted in white supremacy culture. And today we're going to learn about ways in which Keep Growing Detroit thinks about shared leadership, some of the highlights, some of the tricky parts, all the things in between. And so really grateful for that. Small reminder from December to March. So I guess we're in March, friends. This is the last month that we're kind of sitting on specific ways in which we exit old oppressive systems and build new ways of working together, particularly uplifting shared leadership towards a just transition. So this month, we're going to continue to share and explore shared leadership through nurturing power with and alongside and not over folks. And seeding, this episode is around seeding and really laying the groundwork for shared leadership by both uplifting and listening to the voices of those who are most impacted by unjust systems, and then creating ways in which we could share some of the weights, the joys, the responsibilities for how we offer within the community ways in which to address those negative impacts and heal them through government's models and practices, that some of which we draw upon historically, some of which we create on our own. And so just to put a finer point on what brings us here today, I will read out loud the blurb that probably got you here today. Traditional models of leadership uphold paternalism and individualism, and this approach can move us away from opportunities to learn, share decision-making, and co-create with teams and people who also have a stake in the work. How do we create a garden of openness, curiosity, and an experimental spirit to think about what a leader-full organization could be like? Today, we chat with Tepfirah and Lindsay, co-directors from Keep Growing Detroit, to find out. A little bit about Tepfirah Rushdan, pronoun she. Tepfirah, or T, is a co-director for Keep Growing Detroit, overseeing education and capacity building. This team produces the education series, manages Keep Growing Detroit, KGD special projects, supports land and policy work, and runs the Youth Farmer Education. 2020, she co-founded the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, which provides capital for land purchases and infrastructure. Outside of KGD, Tepfirah also serves as a board treasurer of the Detroit People's Food Co-op and co-founder of Black to the Land Coalition, which connects BIPOC people to outdoor recreation. She is also currently a board advisor to several other community projects and has formerly held seats of the Detroit Food Policy Council and Uprooting Racism Planting Justice Initiative. So glad you made some time for us, T. Along with T, we have Lindsay Pielack, also pronoun she. Born and raised on Detroit's west side in North Rosedale Park, Lindsay has worked with the urban agriculture community in Detroit since 2004, following her time serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay. She has been instrumental as an organizer in developing and expanding the Garden Resource Program. She leads the Garden Developmental Team, which assists residents in starting and maintaining gardens in their backyards, schools, and neighborhoods through distribution of garden resources and garden development support. Lindsay also leads KGD's efforts to engage and support early childcare providers and families with young children with tools and activities for garden-based learning to inspire Detroit's youngest eaters to develop healthy habits that will last a lifetime. Her favorite part of her job is meeting all the amazing Detroiters who passionately start and maintain gardens and farms as a way to impact change, both in their own lives and those of their families, neighbors, and community. Lindsay and Keto, I hope I got their name close, also on staff, are so grateful to raise their daughter June in this incredible community. Lindsay graduated from University of Michigan with a Bachelor of Science in Resource Ecology and Management, and as a proud graduate of the first class of Urban Roots Community Garden Training Program back in 2005. A warm, hearty welcome to T and Lindsay. So glad you're with us. I'll pass it on over to you, T, to help us further with some grounding and sowing seeds.
Hey, thanks, Hamida, and thanks for everyone that came out today, including Lindsay and T. I'm looking forward to our dialogue today. I think for me, most of the folks who come to see Centering Justice know that we really launched at the peak of the pandemic when we were asking some deep and complex questions about who are we listening to, who's guiding and shaping our work. And for the last 3 years, we've had the delight of hearing from doers and change makers and luminaries. And the pandemic and the racial reckoning and rebellions of the last few years really illuminated, I think, for many more people, the deep fissures in our sector that shape and prop up and uphold racism and other forms of oppression. I am really delighted to share with you all that I was selected alongside 8 other leaders, including one of the directors of Keep Growing Detroit, for the McGregor Eugene A. Miller sabbatical program. And that program has been around for a long time, but this year they were really focused on rest for Black and Brown and other leaders. And one of the roots of that sabbatical program were about pressure testing succession planning in organizations, and knowing that we were going to be applying, it was sort of timely because we had also been talking about our own internal succession plans and thinking a lot about what leadership in this organization, both among the staff and the board, would look like. So we'll have a chance this summer when I step away for a couple months to try on having 2 leaders in our organization steer the organization in my absence. So I've been particularly interested in this topic because of its direct connection to new and sort of where we are, but also I feel like in my work-averse broadly, folks have been talking about shared leadership. And as a response to those structural issues, how do we share power? How do we shift the representation in our sector from one that's been primarily white women led to one that's more reflective of the communities that we serve? And I think there's still this tendency towards sameness. Like I've noticed a number of organizations now, as opposed to maybe a year or 2 ago, thinking about and shifting towards this. And today I just want to hold the nuance that these returning or unlearning to more shared leadership and power is nuanced, and it differs from one organization to the next. And I want to really challenge us to think about is more than just, we share titles, right? It is a total transformation in some ways of the dominant culture norms that sit within our organizations that valorize hierarchy, paternalism, individualism, and I will acknowledge, even for myself, being incentivized, like you get a lot of juice when you get that CEO title, right? You get a lot of bullshit too, but well, that's for another day. And like even unlearning for myself those dominant culture values that I have been rewarded for and that I have perpetuated, and healing through that for myself and alongside others on the team. So it's messy, right? And I don't know that we always are talking about the practice. And as y'all know, for those of you who participate regularly, this is not a space for the answer. It's a space for exploration, for experimentation, for learning. And the other thing that I think is under discussed when we talk about shared leadership and power is the emotional capacity that's required, the skills that are required. Those structural, it's not just enough to put a Black person in a leadership role or, to give somebody a title. We also need to take a trauma-informed approach and to recognize, as our colleagues at the Building Movement Project did when they published the Race to Lead Revisited report, we have got to actively abolish whiteness in the cultures of our organization. And that requires a level of emotional capacity that I can say I'm still developing. So we're going to talk today with these two beautiful souls about their triumphs and their challenges, the tools they're using, the lessons they're learning and unlearning. We're going to hear their first person accounts about working in a multiracial team, which is also something I think is really important for us to think about, and how their own personal and organizational commitments and values around justice are undergirding their approach. Like any good work, like I said, it's juicy and messy, and I'm just so glad that they said yes. So let's get at it, y'all. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for that additional grounding, EOD. T and Lindsay, so glad you're here with us. So we always start out CJ Centering Justice with asking our speaker collaborators, we want you to bring your whole selves into our space today. We know that we can't separate our work from our personal. We're people and we're all aggregated together. So in that spirit, can you start us out by sharing a little bit about yourself and telling us about the communities and identities that you are drawing upon as you entered into this conversation?
Sure, I can start. Hello, everyone. So glad to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation. Before I even say anything, I'd just like to acknowledge that there's so much wisdom in the room, and the folks on your screen. We're people, and I just wanted to invite that, whatever wisdom is in the room, we're open for that as well. I come in the room, I'm a biracial woman living in Detroit. I was raised in Detroit, and just a quick background. In my early 20s, I really got into the Black Revolutionary movement in Detroit. And so I do consider myself a Black nationalist. And so I've veered off the pathway a lot, and I'm coming into balance with, with these systems and how to balance that out for myself. And so I've been in nonprofit work for the last 10 years as I'm on that journey. I have 4 children. And so in addition to the community work, I'm also pretty busy at home with teenagers and and doing their thing. So yeah, it's a little bit about me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Pielack. Again, I use she, her pronouns. Again, I just want to start by saying thank you for welcoming our organization and specifically me into this space. It's a real honor. It's scary. And, T and I, when we were so we have a third co-director too, right? So Ashley is our third co-director. And she said, let's do this. And then she said, actually, I'm really busy. Can you guys do this? And then we, here we are. So
that's the truth of it.
So here we are. So just honored to be welcome to the space. And, with all of our, kind of what are we doing and are we ready for this? I just really want to appreciate how welcoming and supportive and really healthy this space feels. And that's something that I really need right now. And so I just want to, shout that out. So a little about me. I am a daughter to Lois and Doug, born and raised here in Detroit. I, as I mentioned in my bio, have been really privileged to work with the urban agriculture community for going on 19 years. And it really is the greatest pleasure to know so many Detroiters who are so passionate about, this work. I always say that everybody gardens, but everybody also does something else. They have multiple identities too. And we have this privilege of getting to know people and meeting their children and, unfortunately, sometimes going to their funerals and their celebrations. And it's it's a really amazing thing to be part of this community. And I just value those relationships so deeply. I am a partner to Keto, my husband, who also works at Keep Growing Detroit. And that's another, again, I'm mother to June, and she brings me the greatest joy. I think a lot of our transition to forming Keep Growing Detroit, June was born just after that. And she's taught me so much, for better or for worse, about how to live in this world and how to find some balance. And then I think just especially as a white woman and reflecting on my role in this space, as well as in all the spaces that I am, just really thinking a lot lately about just the mirror that our children or our community, and so privileged to be in this community of a reflection of our really, for her, it's sometimes a reflection of my imperfections of being anxiety or worried or overthinking or perfectionism, right? Which are all parts of my identity that I think have made me successful as I've been a worker bee, and all of a sudden am now a co-director at Keep Growing Detroit. And also things that I'm oh gosh, I'm, as I learn, right? Learning has been a journey, right? In terms of what is, I still remember the moment I was with Malik Yakini, and he looked at me in Catherine Ferguson Academy. It was 2007, maybe. He was like, Lindsay, why is your forehead so wrinkled? And I was just taking in this, big thing. And I think it's been a journey ever since. So anyway, really, one of the things that I think is really important about me at this moment and is unlearning some of those traits of white supremacy, but also figuring out who I am and being able to claim multiple truths about myself. As T can tell you, I'm working through getting out of the guilt stage and in a different way of thinking about both and thinking. And I think that's really important as I try to be a better leader in this work. And then something about my identity that I am really leaning into lately is just my love of movement and being outside, and how much sometimes when we're working so hard, we forget about those things. So I love to be out in nature, cross country ski, and that movement and getting out of your head and into your body is something I'm really, leaning into. So that's me. So thank you again for inviting me into space. And I want to say.
Thank you. We love this part of the opening where we get to honor the wholeness and the fullness and the complexity of who you are and who we are. And shout out to Baba Malik and the Detroit People's Food Co-op. We love him. We're still trying to get him as a guest, but I've benefited also, Lindsay, from his wisdom and his teachings. So appreciate having him in this space. One of this particular season of Centering Justice, we've started asking a question that is a big question, but one that we think is beneficial, and that is to invite people to talk about their stories of transformation. And we try to tie that back to the topic. So I'm just curious, what what are some of those moments that you knew your work or you're thinking about something, specifically leadership, had been transformed? And it can be transforming too. Like, do not want to make it like it's a one and done or like it's a box check, but like how has your thinking about leadership transformed, particularly as you've evolved to this co-directorship? T?
That's a good question. I started off as an apprentice with the organization, right? And so I didn't necessarily always see myself as a leader in the organization, right? I've been on both sides of kind of being staff and also being leadership at the organization. And then outside of Keep Growing Detroit, I've played a role in leadership of other organizations as well. For me, leadership, I think, I keep thinking about this quote, not quote, but something in my mind that I keep thinking about is, we're kind of conditioned to believe that, like there's like one savior or take me to your leader or that kind of like one person. And in actuality, what I find is that there's so many saviors in life. And there's so many, leadership is, it's complex and it needs to be complex. And it's always best when, there's a team of leaders in my mind, because you get multiple perspectives. And so, yeah, I think that's where I'll leave it. I think that's what, that I really come to appreciate and learn and know that I can never just do it by myself. It takes a
It's
team.
almost like we have to like shed those dominant narratives that we've had about what a leader is. And I have to tell you that like these days in particular, when I hear the word savior, I think about it generally in that like benevolence and charity kind of way. But when you said it, I immediately got a visual of like all the people who have been on my journey with me that literally like have saved me. I appreciate that expansive definition. It was so beautiful. Lindsay, how about for you? Like how is your thinking about leadership transforming?
Yeah, I think I share sort of like that feeling of like I've always considered myself like a worker bee, right? Like I'm like not the visionary leader. I'm the doer. I'm the like I'm like take the idea and like help with a process.
Right.
I'm the Carly, right? Like she's all
You're an implementer, as they say.
I'm an implementer, yeah, right. And so and like sort of my journey into how I became a co-director at Keep Growing Detroit is like, when I started back in 2005, I was we were like I was contractual, like I was like the one staff member that was with the Garden Resource Program. And as we grew, our staff grew and I just kind of like kept, if you will, working myself out of a job, right? Like it's like somebody else is doing this, and all of a sudden I was doing more of, coaching new staff or doing more systems things, right? And so like kind of begrudgingly, like as we shifted from the previous organization where our work was held, we wanted to do things differently and share more power. And so, kind of moved to this idea of the co-directorship, right? But I was like, this is, like, yeah, I'll do it, but it's a little token because like, I don't really hold that power. Right. And so, so that's like one moment. And then I think, we have really been, the three of us, working really hard, especially in the last year, around like, how do we not make it token? How do we say like, these three individuals are here because we have these specific skills. And so for me, I think that looks like, like stepping up a little bit more when it's uncomfortable or when it's things I don't like doing because I hold power, whether I like it or not. And I think I mentioned this before, of just like claiming in a different way what that leadership looks like for me, right? So like I can do everything. I'm a multitasker, like, which are qualities of leaders. And I sometimes forget to say, like, and this is the thing that I really want to do. And so I'm trying to figure that out. And I would say, yes, it's definitely for me I still don't know, but it's a journey. And and we're working on that.
That's so resonant. I know for me, just this, and this may sound really simple, but like permission to share the labor has been such a gift. Instead of the story I internalized, which was I have to have all the answers, I have to do more work. You know how people used to say, well, that's what you get paid the big bucks for. And I'm like, well, first of all, first up here in this nonprofit, I don't know how much the big bucks now. Yes, I make more money than people in this organization, but also I've had a lot of responsibility and it doesn't feel sustainable. We're losing some of our brightest and best in this sector because of this pervasive culture of burnout. So this idea of not only power, to, but power with, and it both as a act of justice, but also as an act of care for ourselves and for others. I'm really interested in exploring that more.
Yeah, Yojit, I wanna briefly cabbage on to what you just shared, because I think about, there were times in past roles where I'm sitting trying to think of some great solution that's gonna address all the multiple perspectives. And I think about, for me, retrospectively looking back, what a poor approach that was, because there were real live people who could have offered solutions as well. And I think about what beauty it is to be able to allow folks the chance to offer their resources and strengths and gifts and perspectives, and not sort of spin wheels at the time very tiresomely to come up with something that doesn't really allow folks to share their thoughts, their strengths. And so within that, Lindsay, you talked about really not holding power in name, and not sort of like like sharing power in a tokenizing way. And also like holding that leadership includes stepping up and also claiming what leadership is like. So we talked about sort of like your triumvirate, and there is you're a multiracial group. And so one thing that was coming up, knowing that kind of like within a multiracial group, like that can offer its own complexities. I think organizationally, there are sometimes perceptions around like, what does knowledge look like? Like, what does experience look like? Like, are we looking for credentials? Are we looking for, Lindsay, to your point, like on the ground worker bee experience? Like, what does that look like? Like, what are our criteria for leadership? And then knowing that due to racial identities, we've had different lived experiences. So how do those play with each other? So really curious if you could talk about how your identities and experiences are intertwined with your approach to leadership, and how are you navigating race and power as a team? Two big questions. I'm happy to ask them over again. First one is, how are your identities and experiences intertwined with your approach to leadership?
I mean, do you want me to? I can,
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean,
Yeah.
I have a thought to just like start us off. I mean, I think one of the things that that I'm continuing to learn, right, is like, so when I entered Greening of Detroit back in 2005, right, I was like entering it with like a university degree, living with my parents after the Peace Corps, like a really sense of stability, and like I had the skills to jump in to this work like 175%, right, working way too much, way too hard, and can keep up, right? And so like that sets a pattern for the culture and like the output of work, and then we all know the nature of the nonprofit world, right, where it's just like continues to build and build, and right, and like and some of the intent, some of the impact didn't match like the intent along the way, right? And have learned in some cases many years later about like the harm that like my capacity really has on like what our organization has been shaped to be like, right? And so I think like I now am like continuing to like figure out how to unlearn some of those things again, but also use my strengths as like I'm efficient. I'm like good at training people. I'm good at modeling things. I'm, like, and we're moving this giant ship of 2,000 gardens, right? That is like, how do you create space for people, but also step back to let them do differently? And that's been like, like, I think that's been a task that I've gotten better at, like doing less, creating more space, taking more time. But it's like a really hard adjustment. But I think that's part of what my leadership is. But I think I'm, again, like the how to balance all that has been, has been a challenge. But I think like that's where I'm at in my leadership journey, is like, how do you use these skills, take a back seat, create space, but also not drop the balls? Or what I'm learning now is like drop the balls, right? Like which is scary as all get out, right? So like trying that on. I'm going to 2023 is the year of Lindsay being a cheerleader and dropping balls, and we'll see how it goes.
Oh, can I
He's
say
laughing
something
at me.
real quick about that? Lindsay, for whatever it's worth, I'm going to share with you something a mentor of mine told me. She said, there are rubber balls and there are crystal balls. Personally, professionally, we don't drop the crystal balls, right? But those rubber balls, they'll bounce back. They will bounce back. They'll come back. The email, all that'll be there. And somebody mentioned a culture of care. To me, the crystal balls are our team, the people we work alongside, the communities we're in, et cetera. T, how about you?
I love that. And I definitely applaud that, Lindsay. For me, I come into the space and, we've had a lot of conversations and understand that, perspective is often different for different people at the organization on like what it felt like to come into the organization, right? So I'll just share my perspective, understanding that it may be different from other people who are on our team, right? So from my perspective, when I came into the organization, there were only there was only one other Black person on the team. And we were both apprentices in a team of probably 15 at the time, including the farm apprentices. I then moved from an apprentice to like a full-time staff, and at that point in our organizational history, I was the only brown person on the staff, and that was it really shaped my outlook on a number of ways, because we are in this blackity black city. We're an 85% Black city. I couldn't believe that this was allowed to happen, basically. You know what I mean? I couldn't believe that within a Black city working on urban agriculture, we have a nonprofit that would hire white person after white person after white person to be in leadership. And the reason I couldn't believe that is because I was aware of the impact that would have on the Black participants, seeing resources come from white hands continually, and seeing the white people at the organization as the experts, and how farming is already somewhat a difficult thing for our community. Leah Penniman, who is a farmer in upstate New York, says that the land is the battlefield for Black people. And so understanding that there's already this like complex relationship with land and farming for Black people, and like to show up at the farm and it be like all white people, I automatically knew that Black people were gonna be like, this ain't for me. You know what I'm saying? Already it's a difficult thing, and I don't see myself here. And that made me very upset, because I knew how important it was for Black people to re-engage with their food system. But that barrier, and at the time, like this organization held a lot of power in the city, both with funding opportunities. So this was the organization that was receiving the funding for urban agriculture, I would say, more than any other like urban ag organization in the ecosystem. So, you know, it also, I am, I'm biracial, multiracial, so I bring a lot of like experience with white people in the room as well. And so I was also like, you know, I can speak candidly with y'all, right? Like, I'm just like this, high yellow, Black woman that's like, it's so quintessential, right? It's like the one Black person who can speak your language, that's who you've hired. And it's just, but I would say for me, I've often been in those positions where I'm kind of like this middle man being of biracial identity. I'm able to traverse both worlds pretty easily. And
we're the good Black folk.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Safe,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Safe, and, so, I joke like, I left, I left the door open, you know what I'm saying? Because, like, so like, imagine we have this white staff and the Black kind of, participants in the program. And so many people were just like, they hired you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and there was all these conversations, right? Of like, things that the Black participants wouldn't tell the white staff that they would tell me, you know what I'm saying, about the organization. So often put me in this weird situation where I had to try to translate that as positive feedback to the organization and not put myself in an awkward situation with because these were my bosses, right? Yeah. So I championed like more diversity at the staff, like breaking down different, I've had like, there were Black people that came to me in all transparency that, felt the effects of what Lindsay was talking about, like that white culture at the organization were like literally ran, like, I can't be here. You know what I mean? And I would like, talk to them and like, no, like we need more Black people on our staff. Like, and I would try to figure out a way to accommodate and like, accommodate the situation. Right. And so, I don't know. So that's my perspective. And as we acquired more Black people on the staff, then we had more white people in leadership. So that was a secondary, like, as a secondary, like, situation, where it's like, now we do have more diversity, but we have white leadership and Black employees. So that was another dynamic, right? You know what I mean? To navigate. And I think we're, quite honestly, right at the precipice of really addressing that as an organization. I joined the leadership team in 2019. And for me, whereas Lindsay and Ashley were the the leaders of the organization, and but Lindsay, as she shared, like she didn't really fully embrace the leadership part. She more stayed in the program part, right? And they had a dynamic between them, and then me entering into the pyramid, right? now. I would say, I being that brown person at the table, I was like, I cannot be a token, right? Like, I just cannot be here and not have the power that this position holds. And so I challenged at every turn. I felt like I was challenging, like, the, our power sharing, capacity. And I think in the last 3 years we've made some great strides around that. So I'll stop there. So we
It's
can
so
get to
good
that
though.
question.
Like, I don't want, there's a lot there, T. Just kind of want to let it rest for a second.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
And I bring, I'm very comfortable talking about race, and I know that this is a safe space to do that. So I'm coming at it not from a perspective of, like, anger or being mad, but also, like, let's really look at this and how do we change this dynamic? You know what I'm saying? And, like, if we don't talk about it, you know what I mean? If we don't talk about it, we can't change it. You know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
I just want people to know that that's the spirit that I'm coming. I'm not coming at it with, like, you know what I mean? Like, you did this to me. You know what I'm saying? It's more so like let's really analyze this dynamic and let's really change it.
What's so powerful about it, and Lindsay, I would love to hear like your thoughts on T's thoughts, but I appreciate your offering there, T, because what it tells me, and it's something we've been trying on here at New as well, is the importance of having, I kind of alluded to it at the opening, like the emotional capacity to hold this necessary and generative conflict. And I think what I see and what often folk come to us for, because we do a lot of race equity work, is give me the tool, give me the thing, give me, give me the answer. And so much of what you offer is relational, it requires, as Adrienne Marie Brown says, trust and capacity. It requires truth, right? And I heard you talking about the intersecting identities you have, but also, and the maybe orientation towards the world you may have in your biracial identities, right? But also as a Black nationalist, like, and also in a Black city, which for folks, for example, who are based in Washtenaw County, it's the exact opposite, T. It's a majority white community. And the answer I always hear is like, well, we can't find anybody, or there's like, so it's a different paradigm. But what I love about what you said is it's not about blame and shame. And sometimes this work has been influenced by white guilt and shame. And so we're coming at it from that posture of like how they feel versus how important it is for all of us to be able to grapple with these complex issues. And if you can't talk about it, you can't change it, right? Lindsay, what came up as you were listening to T?
Well, as you can imagine, this is a whole long and like big story that we have to share in all of the experience. I think what I can add is again, especially as we've tried over the last year to like deal with some of the past harm of like how our intent, right, of where we began to where we like where we began and what we tried, what our intention was and where we fell short and how we kept moving, right? Like, I think a big part of that is owning like a lot of that was maybe just like, like we didn't make the space or take time to slow down in the ways that would have, but it wasn't, again, it was not for lack of intent, right? So I think, I think a lot of this work for me also in terms of like, how it's so hard to like dissect, but I think like it's not always about what you're doing. It's also about the relationships and the trust and the, you know, like, I think one of the things that was like, I don't want to say eye-opening, but like the experience that I had from 2004 till, or even when T joined in what, 10 or 12 T, like till, you know, like the experiences that we had were not the same experiences, right? And you know, like meaning me, like not to say that her experience wasn't her experience, but like what my lived experience and what T's lived experience were very different. And I think that comes from like our worldview and how we entered this work and how we, you know, took time to prioritize, you know, different, you know, things, I guess. And, you know, and again, I don't say that as an excuse, but like, I say that as like, it's so nuanced in terms of like, you don't know what you don't know until, you know, you have the privilege of someone like T, right? Being someone that I will say that trusts me and has, you know, valued my presence in this community enough to say like, hello, Lindsay, look at what's happening, right? And so, you know, I'll just say that it's like, and I think the other thing for me that like, just to reflect on is, you know, like, and this is guilt, right? It's like, you get to a point where you're like, I'm the problem, right? Like, okay, there's 2 white leaders, like, I'm out, like, I care too much about this work. I care about this community. I'm just here, like, I want to bring my skills and my passion and serve, right? And so like, I can go. And like, the reality is that as we work to become the organization that we want to be, it's not that simple, right? And so what we're trying to untangle and weave is like, what are the systems of power that I participated in terms of like productivity and culture and white, you know, white supremacy, like
attributes,
identities that I embody, and what are the things that, like, you know, in terms of transparency and sharing of powers of skills that we have to break apart, so that whether it's a white person in lead or whether it's a Black person in lead, like, we're not going to get there unless we deal with those things. And so I think I'll stop there. That's some reflections on like how I you know.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm gonna pivot a little bit. Like, if I imagine that we just talked about kind of present state, right, or current conditions, now I want to invite a bit of radical imagination, like in a preferred future or in a dream world, right? How would this go? And I think that y'all are, I'm gonna use a garden metaphor, planting some seeds for this. That's about all I could do. Like, for real. That's it. That's the extent of it. How would this run? And like you mentioned, Lindsay, some of the steps that you're taking, like, yes, there is individual work. Yes, there is interpersonal work, right? And an appreciation for who's bearing the labor of that. One of the reasons why you're here is because I really sense, Lindsay, that you understand the work that is your own, right? I think that's, you know, in the few
never can learn enough, but I'll take it.
Yeah, but there's a level of like humility, but it's also, even though T, check me here if I'm off, is like calling you in on that or illuminating it, it seems, at least to me, like the onus for the where we go is not that, like, you're not putting that on T. And I see that you're listening, you're hearing, you're discerning, you're doing your work. So can y'all talk about like, what is the radically imagined version of this leadership model that y'all are experimenting with? What does that look like? What steps are you taking to get there?
You want to go?
And the chat, can I just say one thing? The chat is blowing up.
I'm trying to like.
I can't
I
read and
also
think and
like
speak at the
private
same time.
message Chandra because I saw her hand up and they agreed that we could come back to it. But I'm gonna try to take a look for those of y'all who are in the chat. I'm gonna try to take a look, and if there are questions, I'll make sure that we have time when y'all are done speaking to ask those too. Okay. Sorry, Lindsay, didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, I was going to say, T, do you
Yeah.
want to?
Yeah, yes. So I guess, I think about it from the broader perspective of our communities and our nation, in terms of sort of the capitalistic, individualistic mentalities that we bring to our workplace, right? Like, and I think about like, as we move in a direction of more social construct of being and in community with each other, I think we need to really examine just like what does leadership mean, because like one thing that I think all three of the directors agree is that we don't just because we may take part and share in some of the responsibility, like the back of the house responsibilities of an organization, doesn't mean that we're more important than other staff at the organization, right? Or that our roles are more, as people. So like, and oftentimes, being a step removed from the actual program work means your opinion is less, your opinion about the direction is even less accurate, I'll say, because you're not as close to the people that you're impacting, right? So like the farther you are away from the people, the less you kind of may know about the direction an organization should take. And so how do we move to a system of like, I think we're so used to like I said, like take me to your leader, and like to having multiple leaders at the organization that that bring in these that we value these different experiences. For example, you mentioned Yodi, you mentioned like valuing lived experience, valuing so how do we not like create these hierarchies of like, I'm the finance director, so I have this amount of power at the organization. When in actuality, the person who's sitting on the porch with the grandmother is probably, more knowledgeable about the direction that the organization needs to take or changes that. So how do we like bring both of those perspectives and not value one over the other, but like bring it here? And also the person who's on the porch may not understand the finances that it takes to keep you on the porch. You know what I mean? And so how do we like, understand each other, but also not overvalue one over the other? So that's what I'm thinking about.
That's deep. I mean, I think if you just keep dropping jewels, my God. But one of them was that we have to be careful not to replicate the same hierarchy, but pat ourselves on the back just because now it's three of us instead of one of us, right?
Right.
And it makes me think about Atten Bridges, who was with us talking about sociocracy and how we govern ourselves. And really like what I've struggled with here at New is if the organizational design doesn't change, right, it doesn't matter what we call ourselves. And that's been the harder part about dismantling some of this is that you got to get at the roots of it, the way in which the structure itself kind of props it up. And to your point, who do we value? And I think going all the way back to what you said about how resources were flowing into Keep Growing Detroit, part of that, let's name that part of that is who philanthropy and donors trust with the resources. Part of it, part of why all of us have a job is because we don't actually believe that the people impacted by the issues we're working on are trustworthy enough to solve them for themselves. If we actually believe that folks who are experiencing poverty, folks that are experiencing food insecurity, folks that are experiencing health disparities know what they need, if we believe that, most of us wouldn't be here, right? And our position within the ecosystem would look different. And I've been thinking deeply about how does New use its institutional power and privilege. We don't empower nobody. We help to build power. People build their own power. And that is a paradigm shift as well, right? One more thing I'm gonna say is we have inherited command and control management styles from the European colonizers of these lands. And so until we move away from that notion and structure, right, it doesn't really matter what we call ourselves. And this is why I'm so delighted by what y'all, come on now. I have shared this article before, but the sister who wrote, Kimberly Johnson is her name, and she wrote an article, which we'll drop in here, How to Be an Anti-Racist Supervisor. And she said that she come to know about herself that her visceral response to being a supervisor did not have to do with the Industrial Revolution. It had to do with the slave trade. That is what was at and so what Atten in talking about sociocracy offered for us, what Kimberly and her work around dismantling these colonizing management styles, et cetera, and what you all offer today is that, like, how is there power with? How are we shifting from we have the answers to we can galvanize and bring resources because of our proximity to them, to the communities? So good. So good.
Whew. She dropping bombs and we all felt it. Thank you for that.
I think like this call is still like one of the challenges, right, of the co-directorship model, right, is like, so when we started Keep Growing Detroit 10 years ago now, right, we adopted the co-director model with the intention of being a more flat organization, right, where service leadership, the directors are in service to the, to the field staff that are like the best, like T was saying, the best folks that know what the community needs and can best serve, right? So like that's where we started, but the challenge is that like tools alone are not effective if people aren't part of the process to design those. They don't speak the same language as those tools. They're not have enough time and power to implement them. And so like so I think we've continued to build out like that idea of flatter, but also learn that like when you ignore that there's still hierarchy, you're telling a lie, right? Because there is hierarchy and you need to like own that and like have that be transparent to people, right? And so some of the tools that we're using to like kind of get past that, one is like the T and Ashley and I have a so we all write project plans, right? Which is like what are you going to do this season? How are you going to do it? What is your budget, right? And so like not only do staff do that, but like trying to engage staff even more in like understanding the open book finance and the budget and budgeting tracking, right? So that they are informed decision makers around those and also accountable, right? Because that's also one of the like holes is like, I want all the power, but I don't want the responsibility. Welcome to middle management, right? And so we use tools like our project plans and then we also for like the co-directors, we also have this year, we've been saying like, T's been saying like, we got to write the financial policies down. We got to write the policy down when you want to buy a pair of boots. You know, like what's the access, right? And so we've been working on, like, we call it demystifying the back of the house, right? Like all of these things that happen invisibly. How do we make sure that, starting with the 3 co-directors, we are all on the same page around, like, how do you close the books at the end of the month? How do you? And so Ashley's sabbatical, which she is, you know, participating in with Yodit, is like basically like a really beautiful opportunity for us to like kick ourselves in the tail to really like implement this idea of like transparency and like really clear tools. And so our director project plan basically says, like, what are all those systems that like Ashley's like, oh, you know those systems, We're like, we don't know. We need to practice them, right? So like her sabbatical will give us an opportunity to use some of those tools. And then we're continuing to implement things like the budgeting tracking, like, you know, again, how do you give managers at manager level at Keep Growing Detroit more autonomy to say, like, I want to do this and here's how much I need it, and like close the books, give them the money, give them the credit card, right? And like those are all like such nuanced things, right? That if you don't know, you don't know. And how do we make those more transparent? So that's some of the like tools, but it's also been a process. And then you also have to shift, like, how much time does all that take for T and I, right? So we're both in this role of like, we do behind the house stuff. And then we're also very like much, doing the direct work, right? That our team's like, I got to do site visits. I'm doing all the early childhood work. Like, and it's just like, how do you balance all of that? And so it's a work in progress. And it's like, so that those are the tools, but then, and like the tools have to be created and by the folks that are using them. And so one of the, back to like T's point of like the, who's in leadership, another one of our goals is, how do we achieve a majority Black leadership at Keep Growing Detroit, and like within 3 years, right? And so if we set that as our goal that grounds all of that director project plan of how are we going to get there, like that's the first step for us. And the other step, if anybody out there has any wisdom, is like, who else has done this? And can you give us some clues on like, let's learn from other organizations that have moved from a white leadership to, having, more or majority Black leadership. And like, we don't know, but this is, this is what we're throwing at the wall currently.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question on that? And then which is part of what I'm finding with hiring, we've had to make tons of adjustments to our job descriptions for starters, to like remove any of the stuff that is going to signal to someone that they shouldn't apply. Like if you don't need an advanced degree, we don't put that on the job description anymore. If you don't need a degree, we don't put that on there anymore. And we're trying to be more explicit. As a result, our job descriptions are now like 5 pages long because we're trying to give as much information as possible. But also I do at times see a challenge with the competencies I need as we're inviting more diverse candidates into the space, or at least the baseline competencies. I'm not talking about any of the, letters behind your name stuff. And so I'm finding that we are actually having to create an internal process to develop, be very thoughtful about developing the people that we want to move into leadership. And I want to say this out loud because I think it is a challenge that many organizations are facing, Lindsay, but nobody really wants to say it. That like actually the professionalized sector that we've created that has structurally locked people out of opportunity has now resulted in a more homogenous pool of folks that we can pull from to put in these positions. I see your heads nodding, but I'm really like checking in. Is that part of is that underneath some of what you're saying when you say, how do we move to a majority Black leadership team? Is it about how are we developing people to move into those positions? Yeah.
You want to talk about the professional development?
I'd love to hear from you right now.
On so many levels. I mean, definitely being intentional with investing in people and being able to take that time to invest in people, understanding the systemic challenges that folks have when they come to the table. And so, yes, that's definitely a part of our value system. With the award that that the McGregor Fund gave, we also have made some special funding available for BIPOC individuals on our staff for professional development. And so that includes me going back to school, some funds for me to go back to school. That includes some facilitation support for particularly for our BIPOC staff. And so, yes, and yes, it is a challenge, and it's something that we all have to just like be committed to. I think, and if I'm being transparent, like I can put a job application out and get, 500 young white farmers who want the application, right? And even in Detroit, right? And it's about like, okay, I'm running a youth program and I want the youth to see Black leadership. And that is absolutely a part of the job description for me, because they are primarily Black youth. And so, I don't know if that draws any lines, but I think that is a part of like considering what, who we need to hire. And then so it's like, okay, factoring that into my job as a manager, the supports that person needs, flat out, and that is the work. So Lindsay, I know we
I would
talk
just
about this
add,
a lot.
yeah, I mean, I would just add that I think it also starts like I think it also starts with like our programs, right? And like built into KGD's, like programs with the Garden Resource Program, or like the work that we are doing in community is leadership development, right? So we spend a lot of times in, not just being, delivering seeds and plants, but like starting with like engaging and making folks feel welcome and heard in this space, everything from like how we listen to what our program should be to where programs need to grow. So like, as we have developed more, advanced programming, for example, like T developed a program last year that was like, basically we had all this demand for building hoop houses and water catchment systems, right? And then rather than like KGD hire some more people to be on staff and like continue to grow our organization, we're investing in Detroiters who are builders that also want to build the skills. Or when we have our Urban Roots Community Garden Training Program, not only are we like teaching them how to start a garden, but also like investing in like, leadership skills along the way. And how do we then have them teach the classes next year, or them be the models for like the students who are learning, right? And then, over a very, long period of time, right? Like the pool in Detroit, I would say is greater, so that when we post job positions, we are, there are Detroiters with those skills that are passionate about, joining and being part of Keep Green Detroit's team. And like, but that is like super intentional investment in the community that we serve, as like they have this vision, they have this passion. What skills do they need to, we do like a open book finance class where we teach people how to do open book financing for their small businesses, right? Like those people are all of a sudden better candidates for both Keep Green Detroit, as well as to start their own organizations and do the work. And so that's a little bit more about like, I think how we are investing in like building those skills that are, sometimes like, oh, those nonprofit skills, right? People are like, how do we be stewards of like sharing that knowledge and those skills that our staff has at Keep Green Detroit with the community, whether they want to work with us or whether they want to work with you, or whether they want to start their own farm. And so that's like some intentionality that we've had around like, yeah, where are the candidates, right? And and it's it's real.
Hamida is.
I feel like there's so many questions, like you touched on tools. I was just looking at your team, and there's so many different folks on staff, so many different ways in which you have ways in which to allow voices to come through. T, I heard you talk about like ways in which you can show up as a manager. But I also see there are lots of folks who don't have that title, but also ways to share power. I think I'm just soaking all of this in and really
For a
appreciate
lot.
also trying to keep track with the chat, like Emily and I think Shiloh, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So many good thoughts.
Mhm.
You know,
I think this idea of like a culture of care, right?
mhm.
And Shiloh, I don't know if this was your intent, but I love like the bridge between our, everybody gets a sabbatical and what can we do today is like we can create opportunities for rest, organizational rest, individual rest, for care through not just professional development, but policies and practices that institutionalize that. I really, talking about how our values reflect our humanization of our teams, that really resonated. Hamida, I don't know if you had a follow-up thought, but I want to just don't let me forget that Sandra had a question, and maybe there are other folks that did as well.
Yeah, if we feel good about transitioning to questions, I'm happy for us to do that.
Yeah. So for those who might be new in the space, we welcome your voice or your questions in the chat. We just ask that you're mindful of how much time you take up. So maybe if you could be just a minute or two with your question and allow time for feedback from our guests. And it's a relatively small group, so if you use the hand raise function, we should see you. And if not, you could just holler out too, because we like that. We flow like that. So can I start with Sandra, if they're still here? And thank you for being so patient with us.
Yes, I'm still here. I just wanted to let Miss T know that I appreciate her because she was very transparent about the leadership interaction between the white and the brown person. And that is a lot of the hesitation about brown people becoming leaders in that position. First of all, we hear about the negative aspect of taking responsibility when it all fall apart. So, we don't want to take responsibility for our own stuff, so let alone big business. So it becomes a question of, do I have the capacity to handle it in the midst of conflict and issues? And it also has to deal with what we were talking about, personal development and self-care. Our people need spiritual, emotional, and mental trauma help. They do not know how to handle conflict situations, which cause us not to be able to get those positions, because if a conflict happen, how do you handle it with a corporation? This is no longer your uncle or aunt. This is a corporation. So it's a deep dive in order to get this leadership situation changed out, and also developing the belief in the brown person that you do have the capabilities of doing and working and handling this work. And also for organizations, it's about them putting forth the effort. You talk about helping the employee. You might need to help them get to work. They can handle the job, they can do the job, but is there an opportunity where you can assist them with getting there and they'll perform their best? A lot of times it's about getting to the situation. It's not about handling the situation. I can't get to you. I want to do the work. I want the job. I can't get there. I did write down a little more stuff, but I'm gonna let other people go. I love you, T. You awesome girl.
Love you too. And oh my goodness, you was just dropping fire. Thank you for that.
Fire. Oh my goodness, Sandra. Thank you. Thanks for being with us. Other questions for our guest? Yeah, Rebecca. Hey.
Hey there. So something that I've been thinking about a lot is the difference between structure and culture and in our organizations. And I think something that in past organizations that I've worked in, I think efforts towards like diversity and inclusion or decentralizing power have resulted in more harm by bringing people in who represent some kind of diversity or group of people who haven't otherwise been represented or who have been excluded purposely. And I think something that I'm kind of wondering about for you all is, the changing the structure is kind of like one step, and then changing the culture of an organization is a whole other step. And not just changing or maintaining, but how are you thinking about that aspect of culture, which is like so much more subtle and so much more nuanced and more difficult to discern and harder to get your brain around.
Yeah, that's real.
Mm-hmm. You hit the nail on the head that when I came on board, like I mentioned, and into primarily white staff, we had all the tools. We was project planning, we was open book management, we was we were doing we had all the tools that's on paper. We dashboarding it, you know what I mean? All of those things that are the so-called tools to like share, leadership and power. But the culture, and it's something we're still working through. I think there are many ways to do it, and some of it is so specific to the organization that it's hard to call it out. But I would just say, I would just go back to the fact that challenging white supremacy is the work wherever you're at. So so if that looks like, it can look different at different organizations. For us, we had a concentration of power within particular leadership that we needed to just start to pull apart. You know what I mean? It could look like that. It could look like, everybody's running around like crazy and nobody, everybody's working. And that means, like, for Lindsay, it's like, let's actually turn the computer off at 5 p.m. regardless of that last email that's coming in. And let's all do that, and let's all commit to that. And if you call me at 5:05, I'm sorry, it's not gonna happen. You know what I mean? So, like, just being really clear about that with each other, not to be rude, but also to be like, that is a new culture that we're implementing, so it can look like a lot of different things. It can also be, I mean, Sandra just came through with so much fire that my mind is like, it's just like, still processing that. But I think how we I hate, so many words in the English. You have to check yourself with the words that's coming out of your mouth, because I'll say how we accept. No, that's not even like, who are we to accept something? So anyway, but how we see differences and perceive differences. So even in my personal life, I'll just say this real quick and then go, because even in my personal life, so my mother is white and my husband super Black, right? And so at the time, and within those two cultures, there's two different like ways of showing up. So my Black side, and forgive all the stereotypes, we're just talking here, right? So my Black side would be like, a little bit louder, little bit louder to the table, but it wasn't aggression. It was just the talk. It was just the way they were talking. And my mother would be like, like, what is, you know what I mean? Like, is he upset? And I'm like, no, he's not upset. You know what I'm saying? And like, and I say that example that this came to mind of just like understanding, like asking the person, like, are you upset? You know what I mean? Or just like breaking that down, because different people show up differently, and seeing it and being okay with that. You know what I mean? So it can mean a lot of different things, I think, and I don't know if you have anything on that, Lindsay, and I know we got to keep it moving, but those are the things that come to my head.
I mean, the things that like are like, tangible things we're like, oh, we need to address is just like, we really invested in like, how do we address conflict, right? Like, how do we create space to like check in with one another, like with everyone's different styles like that. I think like that was our first training that we like was in the bucket of undoing racism, was like, first we need to learn how to like talk to one another in conflict. And so I think that's been like a learning and growth, point in terms of that. And then I think like also like we really identified like we need to take time to just like celebrate and have fun together as like a human connection point, and just like both in like every day, like, the farmers are like having a lunch together on Tuesdays now and like inviting staff, and in our staff meetings or our staff retreats, like go on a retreat and don't talk about the strategic plan, just go kayaking, and those have been like points where people have said like, oh, like that I didn't know I needed that, like that felt really good. And then you have different relationships when you do come into like what is inevitably our like stressful spring, right? And so those points of relationship building, those points of like getting to know one another, taking care of one another, like there needs to be more space and time and intentionality around that. So, as well as like, we have like a laundry list of trainings that we could, make space for, to continue to build our meeting everybody where they're at and what they know and what they don't know, as it relates to like being a multicultural organization.
Thanks so much for that, T and Lindsay. I feel like you touched on Jenny's question a little bit. How have you managed to balance your personality types associated with organizational practice? Basically, how you work to accomplish goals, understanding the approaches can be different. And T, I just want to re-emphasize, like, I loved your point about like creating a boundary and personally holding a boundary. Like if you say you end at 5, like what it means to keep your word to yourself, to the team and yourself by saying, yeah, if you send something at 5:05, I'm not responding. And Lindsay, I heard you talk about like relationship building and community building. And also I've experienced folks, including myself at times, where it's like, I love you, team, but I actually don't want to go there with you. I'm willing to do the work. But there's some things I won't touch, much less touch for my colleagues, right? So thinking about how do you balance personalities?
I mean, and like one of the things, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is like, all of the things I just said, and owning that like, like sometimes you just have to be a manager, right? And like, like, and be direct with folks. Like I've learned so much about, I would say, especially in the last 5 years, the folks that have been in my team, I'm just like, just tell me what, like, give me your feedback, Lindsay, like, don't sugarcoat it. And like, when you can go direct with people and like, just ask for what you need, like create space for like, oh, I can't talk about it now, but I can talk about it later, but like go direct, like I think is a big thing, right? Like being knowing the time and place to like hold that feedback or hold that conflict, but also like just like I don't know what the word is, but besides like being direct and being like, it's okay to have like different opinions and different, but like, how do you hold that conflict, right? How do you stop to say like, oh, I felt like this went terrible. And they say, oh, I felt like it went terrible too. Or I felt like it went great. And like, it's a conversation, right? And that's what you can move forward from. But if it's like, if you don't just get that stuff out and it builds. We've learned a long time, the wrong way about how that can then explode. So, but again, it's a lot of intentionality around like making space for both like feedback and check-ins and planning and relationship building, and like all those things then work in concert.
And I want to bridge what you just said with what Sandra said, that I can't reinforce enough how important it is to have a trauma-informed response, because some of that appeasement that you're talking about, Lindsay, is a fawn response, right? And some of what Sandra was talking about, like T, when she was talking about the differences, racialized differences in her family, are fight, flight, freeze, right? So just understanding that, I think more of our organizations at least need to have that baseline understanding, so that we can support the conditions where going direct and feedback can happen. But if you haven't done the work of understanding your conflict styles, how you show up, those conversations I've seen go left a number of times. Wow.
You're gonna have to print the chat
Got you.
and create a
Carly
book
got
out
you.
of it, because there's like, I'm like, wait, what metacognition, hold on. Like, I gotta break this down. Okay, this is awesome.
This is my look.
Awesome.
I know. This is mine. Like,
So many so much candid conversation happening in the chat, and I appreciate that so much. There are some, again, I didn't even know who was on the call, but I'm seeing some names that I recognize, and just understanding that there is so much wisdom out here, and I really appreciate you guys on the call, and I'm gonna try to make my way through this chat a little bit.
we do. Carly will save it too, and generally she helps us cleaning it up. We do want to honor everyone's time, including the two of you. I know Amita and I and Carly and our team at New are just so grateful that you said yes, especially not knowing us very well, and trusting us to hold the process and offering just such grounding, realness, like authenticity, which more of us need, not some sugar-coated version of this. We need to be honest and real about how changing and transforming the world is not easy work, right? So thank you really deeply from my heart for your time and your trust today.